2011. Hello everybody. Welcome to this last webinar in the Social Enterprise and Sustainability series for 2011. These webinars, as Juanita said, will be repeated in 2013. The webinar will be 90 minutes long in total, and again, as Juanita said, we invite your questions and comments, and we'll try to bring these up as they come up. Remember, we'll also have a final Community of Practice question and answer session next week if you think of questions after the webinar that you'd like to pose. Our follow-up Community of Practice is on October 11th from 10:30 to 11:30. You can log in and post questions prior to that time, or you can also send them in advance if you'd like to proberts@okazi.org. Please, if you're doing this, send them by October 10th. For those who are new to these webinars, or as a reminder, please note that if you use the chat function or pose a question, you'll not be identified with your comments, so you can contribute freely and anonymously. I'll be reviewing slides from the first and second webinar at the beginning and end of this session. Even if you were not able to attend the other webinars, you'll be able to benefit from this one. The resource list prepared for the first webinar applies to all three on social purpose or social enterprise and is posted on the Community of Practice. You can request this if you'd like to receive a hard copy. I've also added or repeated a few new and or featured resources in this webinar. As Juanita said, this webinar will be followed by the Community of Practice, but it will also be followed between November and December by a bridge survey where we can find out more about where you're at with social enterprise and help you work through any of your current issues around social enterprise development. All of the photos featured in the webinar are of actual social enterprises. I'll try to comment on these as we go along. This is one of a series of webinars that was contracted with Doreen Weston of Full Circle Consulting. While I introduce myself further, for those of you who are new to the webinars, I'll ask Petra to put up the first poll. This poll asks you whether your agency has a team assigned to explore social enterprise and earned revenue or social enterprise ideas and strategies. Please take some time to answer that poll. In the meantime, I'll tell you a little bit about myself if you're not already aware. I've worked in management and consulting with cooperative and nonprofit organizations for over 25 years. My consulting practice since 2001 has included work in research, strategic planning, program design and coaching, evaluation, and social enterprise development. Social enterprise has been a very important focus of my practice. I've coached and helped develop a number of social enterprises, and have also had the opportunity to consult with many social enterprise funders. In 2006, I helped bring the Enterprising Nonprofits program to Toronto. I also formed and facilitated the Social Purpose Enterprise Network Toronto. I provided some strategic planning supports to the Peel Social Enterprise Enabling Group and the Toronto Enterprise Fund, and I'm co-founder of and consultant to the Rural Social Enterprise Constellation of the Ontario Nonprofit Network. Some of the information presented today and in the previous workshops was developed in my work with colleague Mary Ferguson of Economa's Program Development Consultants and has been delivered in workshops with nonprofits and funders around Ontario. In 2010, I became one of the editors of the last edition of the Canadian Social Enterprise Guide, and this is one of the key resources in our resource list for these webinar series. Let's review the polls. Does your agency have a team assigned to social enterprise? 33% of you said no, 25% said yes, which is great, and 42% not yet, but thinking about it. So that's just fantastic. And we'll talk today a lot about what the role of the social enterprise team will be in moving forward on social enterprise planning and engaging key stakeholders such as your board. Here are some of the messages that we're carrying forward from our previous webinars. The return on investment in social enterprises takes time and planning. Social enterprise is definitely a process. It's a verb as well as a particular noun. You pass through stages to prepare and engage successfully. Be honest about your reasons and your readiness for social enterprise. A good process and supports can help build your own social enterprise capacity, both of your organization as a whole and of your staff and board. And be ready to say no to a social enterprise idea if it's not feasible. From the last webinar, we learned that 21% of you reported you weren't ready for social enterprise. 63% said you were somewhat ready, and 10 were ready or very ready and just off to the races. While 28% of those who responded also generated some earned revenue, and almost 70% did not, more than 70% have a social enterprise idea to research. Looking at what's required in business planning and funding of social enterprise will help you to figure out if you're up to taking the next steps in exploring or further developing new ideas. I know some of you said when you looked at the PowerPoint today that this part of the development process is a bit beyond where you're at. So those of you on the webinar, I'll assume for now that you're beginning to think about a business planning process. Here's today's agenda. We're going to review some of the concepts from webinar 1 and 2 to set the ground for today. We're going to talk about what goes into social enterprise business planning and some key considerations. I'd like to revisit the issue of cultural change and being an enterprising nonprofit and what this involves. We're also going to deal with the issue of stakeholder engagement, particularly around being enterprising, but also how to connect with the industry in which your social enterprise idea fits. And finally, we're going to talk a little bit about funding, financing, and supports for social enterprise. Here's what we hope you'll come away with from this webinar. As a result of being part of the webinar today, you'll understand what's involved in business planning. You'll recognize entrepreneurial characteristics and a little bit more about how to nurture them. You'll strategize around engaging boards and external business advisors. And you'll be a little bit more aware of funding and financing options. This is a slide of Furniture Bank in Toronto. Furniture Bank offers household furnishings to people living on social assistance. They also operate a social enterprise called Furniture Link that picks up furniture in the community for a fee in exchange for a tax receipt, and that furniture is then repaired and donated to persons in need. Here's where we're going to review some of our social enterprise concepts, the first being the social enterprise development process. In the earlier webinars, we looked at defining your goals and assessing whether you're ready. In the last webinar, we also talked about developing your venture criteria, doing some pre-feasibility work, and then what goes into a full feasibility study. Today, we're going to look at business planning and what goes into that process. We said last time that many social enterprise schemes start without much planning. Programs that may test market sales of projects and services. Sometimes this successfully evolves into a revenue generator, but often it results in a program remaining a program. Sometimes enterprises that aren't performing effectively have to go back to the previous stages to identify barriers to development, clarify goals, and assess the feasibility of particular aspects of the venture. Ideally, your organization will progress through these stages. First, getting ready, preparing your staff and board, setting up your goals, and making sure they're in keeping with your strategic plan, then identifying ideas and assessing them before doing and planning or even execution. For each enterprise idea, the timeline may be very different, so please take with a grain of salt the times that are on this chart. Sometimes an opportunity presents itself and planning proceeds very quickly. This often happens when it's a real estate deal or something where a partnership is ripe for an enterprise idea. It also happens when agencies are already aware of their capacity around social enterprise and ready with appropriate resources and investment to move forward. However, most often the stages may be separated by months and even years, given the need for an agency to address barriers as well as to focus on current programming as a priority. In this webinar, we're going to be focusing on planning and bringing key stakeholders on side. Here are some of the key steps you'll need to take to move towards social enterprise planning, including, as we've said, clarifying your goals, choosing that business idea, and working on feasibility research. We commented last time on the importance of reflecting your social enterprise strategy and development in your strategic plan to get all stakeholders on side and understand how this kind of activity and strategy fits with your mission. We also noted that you may decide you cannot find a suitable idea, or that after feasibility assessment you discover your idea is not viable. In these cases, you'll not move forward with social enterprise, but it doesn't mean you haven't gained some skills and information excuse me, in the process. We talked again last time about quick screening before investing in feasibility, after you've generated a list of ideas. Some of the quick criteria we mentioned for screening include the enthusiasm of key stakeholders, the fit with your mission and values, the fact that an idea leverages strengths and assets or doesn't, the potential for creating strain or opportunities for your organization. Ideas that are a fit with your risk profile are a pretty good bet. Ones where you have a very clear description of your product may be ready for feasibility research. A sizable market or easy competition versus very tough competition or new markets, and where there's an identifiable customer need, opportunities for growth, and where there's a fit with any of your own criteria. Also, a quick a criteria is the potential to increase your own capacity to address your mission. The simple matrix in this slide can be used as a map to map ideas that seem to have a high fit with mission and high potential revenue, along with those that have less fit with your mission but possibly high revenue potential. Those that fall in those quadrants are the ones you may consider exploring for social enterprise. Those that fall in the quarter where there's low revenue potential from earned revenue but high mission fit may need to be reviewed to see where they can be developed into programs funded by external funders or unrestricted revenue you may have in your reserve. Where there's low fit with mission and low prospect for revenue, let go. Don't bother pursuing these ideas. A feasibility is a study is a process of testing key assumptions that determine whether a venture can succeed. It's an opportunity to refine and explain your business concept, and it involves testing and researching the market. It's simply a way to test your assumptions about the enterprise's chance of success. In social enterprise, we generally look at three areas of feasibility assessment: the financial and business prospects of the idea, the feasibility of the proposed outcomes and process, in particular, if it's a human development or mission-based enterprise, and the fit of the business concept with the organization, with your staff, your culture, operations, and most of all, your ability to address your mission and mandate. These last two areas distinguish social enterprise feasibility research from that for a private sector business. In our first webinar, we found that 68% of you have done feasibility analysis for a program or enterprise, while 21% had not. It's great to know that prior to investing lots of energy in a program, you've done your research to find out whether it will address your client's needs and that you have the capacity to deliver it. It's no different in social enterprise, except you need to determine feasibility at a number of interconnected levels: business, finance, social purpose, and organizational. Once you've tested the feasibility of your idea and decided to proceed, it's time to set aside those resources and organize yourself to do business planning. Let's bring up the next poll so that we can see how many of you have worked on a business plan. So the question is, have you ever worked on a business plan for a small business, this is on your own, or a social enterprise as part of an organizational strategy? While you're answering that question, I'll talk about a really great resource for learning about planning for social enterprise. In the other webinars, I've talked quite a bit about Enterprising Nonprofits, BC. On their site, there are a number of learning resources, podcasts, and other kinds of downloads. One of them is called Planning for Social Enterprise, and there is a link on the slide that you'll see here once we look at the poll to that podcast that will tell you a little bit more about social enterprise planning. Let's look at the results of the poll then. It looks like 46% of you have actually done a business plan, which is fantastic, and 54% of you have not. So for those of you who have done a business plan, it will be interesting for you to see whether this compares, the questions that we'll put out today compare to what you've used before in your outline. And for those who haven't, hopefully this will give you a start on thinking about your social enterprise business plan. This is a picture of Kawi in Ottawa. It's a collaborative of women from diverse communities, organizations, and academia working with municipal decision makers to create a more inclusive city and promote gender equality. They're currently operating facilitator training workshops for immigrant women to get involved in the community and produce resources in addition to their social action. They're doing some social enterprise feasibility work these days. Social enterprise planning is not only a tool that documents risks and opportunities, it's also a process that we engage in to develop our capacity for business thinking, to plan the enterprise and risk management strategies, to learn about and articulate your understanding of the business environment you're in, to set your targets and assumptions down, and to engage stakeholders. Here's a wonderful resource for feasibility and business planning, particularly for social purpose enterprises, that I recommend you review. It's a business planning guide produced by RedF in the US. There's a whole startup kit, and I think you'll find it incredibly helpful. Some of the basic reasons we do business planning are outlined on this slide. You can use this as a checklist to make sure you address these objectives in your process. First of all, is your business planning process identifying risks? Is it setting targets for measurement? And by that we mean the amount of revenue you need to make in order to address your goals, the number of jobs you seek to create, and so on. Is it demonstrating the skills and readiness of your team? Is it verifying your feasibility study and the assumptions that are included there? Is it guiding your implementation? Is it making the case for investment? What's key is that your business planning involve staff and board members who are championing your social enterprise process and who will be accountable for the results. Without this connection, your business plan will not be an effective tool. Too often, consultants are hired to do a business plan without the involvement of key staff and board, and the assumptions in the plan are not adequately questioned, or the targets are not clearly owned by the agency. The business plan is essentially a statement about how you will operate operationalize the enterprise and what it will take you to do so. The plan needs to be linked to your strategic plan and grounded in the reality of your agency's mission, capacity, operational systems, and performance planning and measurement systems. So what's the role of the consultant in doing business planning with you? Well, they can help you set up the framework for a business plan. They can coach your staff if the staff is doing the lion's share of the work. They can help you create a marketing plan if you don't have those skills on staff. They can help you design financial models, set sales projections, produce financial statements. They can help you design a staffing model. You can also use a consultant to do industry-specific research, and you can ask them to vet a plan if done by staff at the end of the process or at various points in the process. Here's a resource that's directly linked to this topic, Tips on Hiring a Consultant. Van City Community Foundation has had a lot to do with social enterprise over the years. They work very actively with Van City Credit research or development. While you're answering that, I'll talk a little bit about how we've used students in some of the work that I've done. Most agencies I've worked with have used volunteers and students to support various aspects of their social enterprise development. Students at universities and community colleges can support you by doing, again, industry-specific research, further market research, spot polls, face-to-face interviews, focus groups, marketing and promotion plans. They can help you with financial models as long as you've vetted these with your own finance person and people on your board, your treasurer. They could do space designs, graphics, and even logos. Students can be from business admin and marketing classes, MBA programs, social work and community worker programs, as well as fundraising and communications courses. The important thing here is to provide students with clear tasks and adequate supervision. Most of you will be very familiar with that if you've had field placements in your agency. With respect to social enterprise, though, even if a student is at the graduate level, their work needs to be vetted. You cannot assume that just because someone has the lion's share of a business degree, they'll do a perfect job on your feasibility analysis or sales projections. Having seasoned business advisors, either on staff or on your board, or contracted consultants to help review any work done on your plan by students is a good strategy to follow. Let's check in on those results then for poll 3. It looks like 30% of you have used a consultant and students on social enterprise research, and 70% have not. So I think given that, it would be good for those of you who have not to check out that article on using a consultant and ask others within the sector how they've used students and where they've gone for students to help them with their social enterprise planning and where they've been satisfied with that support. Let's look at some of the key planning questions that we would want to see addressed in a business plan. There are many, many resources on the web and featured resources even planned into this webinar series that outline what needs to go into a business plan. It's really not rocket science. But remember, the checklist related to the purpose of the business plan that we looked at earlier is very important. And be sure to cover the following questions in your process and documentation. What is your product or service? Be as clear as possible about it. It should amount to a very short elevator speech where persons who hear it know exactly what the product or service is and who it's meant for. What is the market opportunity and the context? Why is it that you think you can take a part of that market and sell to it? this particular product or service? Who are your competitors? What has their success been? Why are you and your agency uniquely positioned to offer this product or service? Who will be involved within your agency and outside of your agency? Who will produce the service or product, and how? What is the financial model and the projections for sales and cash flow? What are those risks that you'll face in operationalizing the enterprise? And what is the social return on investment? How will you measure that? One of the key aspects of a business plan is designing that business and financial model for your enterprise. This means that, based on your market and competitor analysis research and your operational model, you can estimate what your expenses will be and what kind of revenue you can expect to bring in. Much of this work should already have been laid out in your feasibility analysis. And if you're proceeding to business planning, your assumption is that your financial estimates, both revenue and expenses, fit with your goals for the enterprise and your capacity to resource the initiative. Financial projections are just that. They're your best guess or a theory of what's possible and probable given certain conditions and drivers. But they must be based on proper inputs. That is, clear, documented assumptions, evidence and research, economic trends, realistic pricing, and experience in effective practice. One of our webinar participants last time asked, where do you find the information for feasibility analysis and business planning? There are many, many sources. Here are a few must-dos. Do an internet search on costs and average revenues for enterprises such as yours. The Government of Canada and industry associations have this data available online. Do discuss current prices and costs with reputable suppliers. Do talk with similar social or for-profit enterprises to find out their costs and reliable suppliers. Do interview industry association representatives. Do read current Small Business Association reports. You can do prospective customer surveys to find out how much they currently spend on services or products like those you'd like to offer and under what conditions. Do crunch those numbers with your treasurer or financial experts and create various scenarios from very conservative to best case. And do remember to match your numbers with your agency capacity considerations. What can you actually expect to produce or spend in the time frame covered by your plan? Here are some other considerations when you're filling out your business plan. The legal structure, management models, and social outcomes and internal and external agency links, particularly if you're employing or training folks who are your clients. Let's look at the next poll before we look at structure. We want to find out from this poll, is your organization currently a registered charity, a nonprofit without charitable status, a cooperative, or you're not sure at this time? While you're filling that in, I'll talk about Parkdale Green Thumb, which is featured on the next slide. It's one of several social enterprises run by the Ontario Council for Alternative Businesses, or OCAB for short. These businesses are owned and operated by consumer survivors, that is, persons with experience in the mental health system. Parkdale Green Thumb is a social purpose horticulture business that installs and maintains outdoor and indoor plants for business improvement areas, nonprofits, hospitals, the private sector, and community groups. They also provide groundskeeping services for the nonprofit housing sector. Let's have a look at the results of that poll just before we go on. So it looks like 75% of you are registered charity, about 17% are nonprofit without charitable status, and 8% are cooperative. So there is a co-op on the, or several co-ops on the webinar today. None of you are not sure, so that's good. You all know what you are. So let's have a quick review of some of the kinds of structures that social enterprises are organized around. There are several ways social enterprises can be structured in relation to or even separate from a nonprofit. The majority in Ontario are operated as cost centers within an organization. They're set up as part of a department, a training department, or they draw on staff from various departments but have their own cost center within the nonprofit. Some are set up without a relationship to an existing nonprofit as a separately incorporated social enterprise with its own board. And A-Way Courier in Toronto is one example of this. There are also social enterprises that are created as for-profit subsidiaries that are wholly or partially controlled by a nonprofit or a separate nonprofit completely. One example is NT Temps. This is a temp agency set up as a subsidiary to the Nottawasaga Futures. This option requires more legal considerations, can be higher risk, and requires quite a bit of entrepreneurial endeavor to realize. Finally, a social enterprise can be structured as a joint venture partnership or a cooperative. Many nonprofit co-ops have been created by parents to provide daycare and nursery programs for their kids. There are also multi-stakeholder co-ops that are forming, such as the West End Food Co-op, to provide food access in low-income neighborhoods while also forging links between farmers, consumers, and workers. As I said, the majority of social enterprises we'll encounter in our community practice will be contained as cost centers within existing nonprofits or charities. But as we know from this call, there are cooperatives that have been following this webinar series. Let's look at some of the factors related to structure. The status of your business with respect to the Canadian Revenue Agency is a very important consideration when you're deciding on your structure. Of course, the primary purpose of your business and the blend that you're seeking between profit or surplus and social purpose. The level of risk that you're willing to take, and we've talked about this a number of times. The amount of control your organization or the social entrepreneur whose idea it is wants to maintain. Your need for and access to equity or other sources of capital. And the effect that the structure may have on community image or reputation for your nonprofit. We've been asked a number of times, is it legal for a charity or nonprofit to do social enterprise? Well, charities can and do engage in social enterprise in compliance with CRA guidelines, the Income Tax Act, and their own provincial legislation related to charities and nonprofits. While nonprofits are not CRA registered, they do not have the same restrictions, but should be aware of their provincial legislation requirements. One thing that's important to know is that the landscape is changing. The Ontario Provincial Nonprofit Act is under review. New guidelines have recently been produced by the CRA for Community Economic Development and Social Enterprise, and some provinces such as BC and even at the federal level are pushing for changes to the Business Corporations Act that would allow for a new hybrid type of company with social aims. In fact, BC recently introduced such a revision, making way for a community contribution company that combines socially beneficial purposes with a restricted ability to distribute profits to shareholders. So, can charities and nonprofits get involved in social enterprise? The short answer is yes, but do your homework on the latest regulations and guidelines at both the provincial and federal levels. Here are some resources if you want to learn more about the CRA, social enterprise, and legal structures. This cover slide is features pictures from Sistering, an agency in Toronto serving women at risk. They operate two craft-related social purpose enterprises. One of them, Inspiration Studio, is a ceramic studio that provides opportunities for women to learn pottery making skills, business skills, and to create and sell their own line of products, as well as to produce for contracts brokered by the studio enterprise. Sistering also supports a similar textile enterprise called Spun Studio. In the last webinars, we asked you how entrepreneurial you thought your organization was. 17% said not at all, 50% said somewhat, and 25% said very. In the next few slides, we'll consider in more depth what we mean by being an enterprising nonprofit as you go through your business planning process. Here are some characteristics related to being entrepreneurial. Seeing change as normal and healthy and embracing change is one characteristic of entrepreneurs. Seeking opportunities is another. Being client-focused or customer-focused is key. Shifting resources from lower to higher areas of productivity, and your flexibility in doing so is another. Taking calculated risks, thinking innovatively, being transparent, and demonstrating optimism are also features of being entrepreneurial. And finally, learning from your failures. In the last webinar, one participant asked, what happens when a social enterprise fails? Remember that your definition of failure depends on your and your stakeholder standards for success. For instance, if the enterprise fails to generate the revenue you'd hoped for, but your agency was ready to invest in the learning and you could document positive results from the effort, then this may not be a failure. But if you and others invested significant amounts of time and resources in the enterprise with great confidence that you could achieve your financial targets, and then your operational systems failed, that is, perhaps staff didn't perform or sales were not made, then this may be considered a failure. For this reason, you need to know what level of risk your agency can tolerate, how you define success as well as failure, and do your planning before launching. In fact, in the business world, failure is an accepted part of being an entrepreneur. As a sector, though, nonprofits tend to be more cautious and risk-averse due to our community and client accountability, our training in social services, and the multiple sources of funding that we find our resources from. In assessing value and success or failure in social enterprise, include your considerations for the multiple outcomes and bottom lines of your enterprise: social, organizational, financial, and even cultural or environmental. We asked how many of you had invested time and resources in a program only to discover it wasn't feasible. 33% of you said you had, while 61% said you'd not. It's difficult to learn that a program or enterprise might not meet your goals, but better if you don't continually invest in something that doesn't work and that drains your resources. I mentioned last time it's important to have good measurement systems in place based on your objectives. This could be your financial projections and statements and training or employment metrics, for example. And have decision points and an exit strategy at various milestones in your enterprise development. Here's some thoughts on what to do when you're facing failure. Well, nurture a culture that accepts failure based on calculated risks as a stepping stone to future reward. Be solution-focused. Fix if it's fixable, forgive, and move on. As I said, have an exit plan for each stage, a go, no-go kind of decision point, and protocols to follow. Understand your stakeholders and their interests and needs in your enterprise. Those stakeholders could be your funders, your clients, your board, and your staff, and each may be affected differently by failure. Be ready to work with each of them in ways that are appropriate. Communicate the right information to the right people at the right time. Hold the vision, even if failure is imminent. Obviously, you would base your social enterprise on some desire to achieve your vision and your mission related to your organization. And remember to learn from your mistakes and share these with others so they can learn from you too. Here's some pointers from Warren Tranquata and John Pepin social enterprise consultants on how to shift your culture towards a business enterprising orientation. They put being client and customer value centric very much at the top. I have many anecdotes of nonprofit social enterprises that created the structure, the product, the service, the marketing materials, and then forgot to ask their customers how they were doing or whether the product was a fit for them. Focus on your core market. Again, many social enterprises in their aim of generating revenue shift their core market or expand beyond what their core market should be. In this way, they never focus fully on the customers that the product or service is intended for, and they may, their energy may be too distributed. Don't undermine your mission. Listen to your staff, listen to your customers, listen to the market and the industry. Use opportunities to cross-sell and set prices based on the value to the customer. This is an important enterprising characteristic or culture characteristic that in the nonprofit sector we often sell things at cost as opposed to what the value is to the customer and what the margins are that we need to make to operate an enterprise effectively. Becoming more enterprising is an organizational change strategy. It can't be done with one small earned revenue initiative, although you can learn from these kinds of initiatives more about your own culture, the assets and barriers within that can reinforce or hinder social enterprise. I've recommended or worked with nonprofits around a few of these strategies to become more enterprising. Those are introducing entrepreneurial thinking and social enterprise discussion into staff retreats and meetings, providing skills and capacity building workshops for staff, sending enterprise team staff and volunteers to professional development for business administration and management or sales and marketing, contracting an external coach from the business world to help you, and learning from other enterprising organizations through tours, personal research, and conferences. Let's look at the next poll before we move on. How interested in and supportive of social enterprise would you say your board is? While you're answering that, I'll speak briefly about engaging your board. It's not only at the staff level that entrepreneurial thinking is needed. Your board of directors plan and set direction for your organization. They, in conjunction with your management team, also set the tone or culture for your organization. The more risk-averse a board is, the greater the number of barriers you'll face in exploring social enterprise and earned revenue strategies. Here are some suggestions for how to bring your board on side to social enterprise. Recruit board members from diverse sectors. Have facilitated discussions at staff board and board planning sessions on social enterprise, being enterprising, risk attitudes. Organize a tour of social enterprises for the board. Assign key board members from your social enterprise team throughout the development process and have them report back to the board. Provide professional development at board meetings on social enterprise models, innovations, new financing models, and strike a business opportunities task force or board committee. A note here, I've seen many nonprofits that bring on business people to their board, and this is a great thing. But sometimes they'll find that the private sector board members don't understand the accountabilities of nonprofits to our various stakeholders. You'll need to make sure that you recruit experienced board members from a variety of sectors, provide good board training and orientation, and aim for a balance between being entrepreneurial and accountable. Let's look at the results from poll 4 before we move on. So it looks like 33% of you have very supportive boards around social enterprise. 25% have somewhat, and the 17% have not at all supportive boards. And significantly, 25% of you are not sure. And this points to an issue around communication between the board, senior management, and the rest of the staff, and why it's very important to have social enterprise discussions come up in strategic planning and having the staff and board communicating with each other around that. One effective practice in bringing more business experience into a social enterprise development process is to strike a business advisory committee. This is where you invite people with business experience and industry connections related to your enterprise to sit on a committee that's separate from your governance. It's strictly there for design, for advice, for industry intelligence. Use the committee also to build goodwill and important linkages with the business community and to support the board in their decisions around social enterprise and strategic planning. Also consider participating in boards of trade or chambers of commerce and your local business improvement area group if you've begun operating a social enterprise. This will help build some goodwill and collaboration between your enterprise, your agency, and the business community. You should have received a sample terms of reference for the Business Advisory Committee prior to the webinar. This was adapted from one developed by the Toronto Enterprise Fund. This slide shows images from St. John's Bakery. It's a social enterprise in Toronto operated by St. John the Compassionate Mission. It's a wonderful artisanal bakery that provides training and employment for persons at risk of homelessness. And their products are sold at farmers markets, retail outlets throughout the city, as well as their own retail store in East Toronto. Here's our next poll. Have you ever applied for funds to explore or develop a social enterprise or earned revenue strategy? While we're letting you finish that poll, I'll talk a little bit about financing for social enterprise. I know it's a topic everyone is likely very interested in. Funding for social enterprise development is a creative process. There's no question about it. It's often a patchwork process. Unfortunately, and some of you may know this, there are very few sources of grants specifically for social enterprise, though many of us continue to work to change this. Consider investing funds from your own reserves or unrestricted revenue pools for R&D where possible. This is really helpful as many funders seek matching funds to show your own commitment to an initiative. One strategy is to look for sector-based funding programs that apply to your enterprise product or service, not necessarily to your agency mission. For example, if you're producing art or craft, look for funds through the Ontario Arts or Crafts Council, the Municipal Arts or Crafts Council, or foundations that support the arts, in addition to typical nonprofit funders. Or if you're a nonprofit that would like to set up training for newcomers in an environmental service, but you're not a traditional settlement agency, either partner with a settlement agency and or research funds from these two sectors, settlement and the environment, that may apply to your enterprise idea. Let's have a look at the poll and see how many of you have looked for funding. Have you ever applied for funding to explore or develop your social enterprise or earned revenue strategy? 8% have said yes and 92% no. So this shows that there's some considerable work for us to do in learning how to apply for funds for social enterprise specifically. And perhaps we can consider some of this in our community of practice and in the bridging work we'd like to do in the fall and winter with you. This slide, given what you've just told us, may be very important to you, and that is, what are the types of capital and sources of funding and capital for social enterprise? Well, there are many types that you might look out for, and this is all by way of saying it is a creative process of putting a number of things together. Obviously, donations and grants. A number of enterprises have used sponsorships, particularly from other private sector enterprises in the industry that their social enterprise locates within. Some social enterprises, particularly cooperatives, will consider looking at equity and shares, and that very much depends on your structure for your enterprise. More recently, although this has been done for a number of years in the past, but more recently nonprofits are using community bonds to raise local capital for social enterprise, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Debt vehicles, simple loans or bridge financing can help an agency to launch a social enterprise with the expectation that there'll be sales revenue or other grant revenue to offset that debt soon after. Patient capital, and sales, and more sales. I mention this because we often, as nonprofits, forget that the whole purpose of social enterprise is to use a market-based strategy to generate revenue and other social outcomes. So sales will be a most important metric and a means to generate revenue. In terms of sources, there are a number of government programs that can fit with your social enterprise objectives. Foundations, and in particular United Way's these days, are funding and supporting social enterprise as a funding diversification strategy as well as a strategy for addressing employment. Corporations, there are some that do fund community economic development and social enterprise. Credit unions and banks as well can be supportive. Community futures corporations, if you're in rural areas, are a most important place to go to seek out financing and or small support for social enterprise. Few of them have grant streams these days, but they certainly are lenders in the rural areas. Philanthropists and angel investors, social investors. Collaborative pools of funds available for social enterprise, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And there are some community loan funds. There are a number of collaborations that are arising in the social enterprise sector to support social enterprise development. One example is the Toronto Enterprise Fund and enterprising nonprofits in Toronto, which are administered through the United Way Toronto. Both are collaborative funders tables that provide grants to support social enterprises. In Peel, the United Way has established funding for social purpose enterprise that's matched by Peel region. This trend is growing in other regions around Ontario as well. This slide shows, however, that many social enterprises will remain subsidized. This is a recognition not necessarily that nonprofits can't operate successful social enterprises, but that we have multiple bottom lines and different development paths and even different definitions of success from most nonprofit businesses. Social purpose enterprises, specifically those that train and employ our clients, require funding to provide training, accommodations, and transition strategies that the mainstream market cannot or will not provide. These aspects of social purpose enterprise will almost always be covered by government and foundation grants, sponsorships, and donations. In the last webinar, we reviewed this slide to see the challenge of break-even for human development and training social enterprises. It's that getting to break-even for business expenses may take some time. But in addition to this, social enterprises that are social purpose or have training and employment as part of their outcomes also have social costs. We said again, these are for trainers, training time, transportation, life skills work. You'll see in the graph that it takes even longer to break even after those social expenses are covered. Many social enterprises I've worked with do not reach the point where their social and business costs are covered by sales, let alone generating surplus revenue for their organization. Again, it's just important to be clear about your objectives and check your assumptions throughout your planning cycle so that you don't oversell social enterprise and its potential to staff, to clients, to board and funders without proper information. Early on, you can do this by learning from the experience of other social enterprises. There's lots that's changing in the field of social finance these days. New tools and investment vehicles are being designed to match investors to social enterprises. Here are a few websites where you can view some of the latest trends. Cooperative pools. The Canadian Alternative Investment Co-op is one example of a group of religious orders that pooled their investments to make loans and take out equity in social mortgages and co-op businesses. CAIC, as it's called, has just launched CAIF, the Canadian Alternative Investment Foundation, and will be funding feasibility and business plans as of early 2013. You can find out more by visiting caic.ca. Skills for Change, for instance, financed their mortgage with a loan from CAIC. Community bonds. The West End Food Co-op sold out their first bond issue in 2009, and they've created a new bond which also sold well in the West End of Toronto. Their local community market support has created the opportunity to start new programs, expand the farmers market, and more importantly, to open their community store. The Muthart Foundation, a private foundation based in Edmonton, agreed to purchase $1 million in a community housing bond issued by the YWCA Toronto to support the capital cost of its new YWCA Elm Centre. The Centre for Social Innovation also financed the purchase and build-out of their annex building through community bond and social finance loan from the Canadian Alternative Investment Co-op, as well as matching foundation or financing from the city. The Social Venture Exchange is an initiative of Sigget Mars in collaboration with TMX Group Incorporated and supported by many, the Government of Ontario, Tories LLP, Causeway Social Finance, Imagine Canada, and others. It's an online market platform for venture listings, fund listings, service provider listings, and a resource center to facilitate effective impact investments. It allows investors to share due diligence, collaborate on deals, identify high-quality investment opportunities, and to access screened investment opportunities and ventures with detailed information. This is a new venture, and you can find out more by visiting the website on this slide. And a community investment note is another option that's not available yet here, but is available in other jurisdictions, and you may be able to visit the Calvert Foundation to find out more. When you purchase a community investment note, the full value of your principal is lent out to help an underserved community. As loans are repaid, the capital is lent out again, multiplying the social impact of the investment. At maturity, the capital is returned to the investor with interest. Again, we don't have this vehicle in Ontario yet, but it can be explored further by going to the website. And similarly with the fund-of-fund concept, we don't have this currently in Ontario, but research is being done related to the similar fund in Quebec. If you want to learn more about social finance, there is an online guide to social financing that's been put up on the web by MARS, the Center for Impact Investing, and socialfinance.ca. Finally, I'd like to mention just a bit about the supports required by social enterprise as the whole sector develops. Before I do, I want to point out this slide features pictures from Niagara Presents, a social enterprise created by Niagara Peninsula Homes, which was a cooperative housing resource group, in partnership with private and non-profit champions back in the 1990s. The enterprise is tied to Niagara Food Innovation Center, where local people can receive training and support to produce value-added food products, as well as to work in the food-related industry in Niagara. The enterprise produces and sells value-added products through their retail outlet and an online gift basket business. Here are a few of the supports needed for social enterprise to thrive, not only through an individual social enterprise, but as a sector. We continue to need ongoing capacity building and learning opportunities such as this webinar, workshops, and other kind of peer sharing opportunities. We continue to need research and development assistance, both internal to your organization and access to students and consulting supports and information on social enterprise. Individual organizations as well as the sector as a whole need targeted technical assistance and business and organizational development coaching. We obviously need grants and financing at different stages of business development, and those grants and financing need to be tailored to those stages and the needs of the nonprofit sector as well as their investors. And we need continued opportunities for peer learning and sector development so we don't recreate the wheel and we learn from both our mistakes and our successes together. And over all of this, we need a positive policy environment that supports programming and planning related to explorations in social enterprise development. Let's look at the next poll before we finally go over some of the sources of support. Have you or your colleagues ever attended social enterprise conferences, workshops, or visited social enterprises for peer learning other than being part of this webinar? While you're answering that poll, I'll just talk a bit about some of the folks who are available to you for further support on social enterprise development. In webinar 1, we talked about the who's who in the enterprise sector, and in this slide, we review some of these players in light of their offerings of support in enterprise development. If you are interested in social purpose enterprise and are in the Toronto area, the Toronto Enterprise Fund is one that you should check out, both on the web for the resources, but also workshops that they offer and a business planning competition that they sponsor every year. CSED in Ottawa, if you're in Ottawa, will provide coaching and consulting around social enterprise development and for social entrepreneurs, as well as some access to or linkage to the Loan Fund in Ottawa. The Peel Social Enterprise Enabling Group as well is focused on social purpose enterprise and has, as I said earlier, a partnership with the region to do that funding and peer support. Pillar Nonprofit in London and the work that they're doing in Sarnia can be a support to agencies on this call or in this webinar that may be located there. The Social Purpose Enterprise Network in Toronto is a network of managers of social enterprises that have a social purpose, and it's a good source of peer learning and advocacy for social purpose enterprise. Social Innovation Generation at Mars does have some resources for social enterprise, although I understand their advisory services are no longer geared to nonprofit social enterprises. The Center for Social Innovation is a good example of a social enterprise and has put out lots of information on community bonds and other policy papers related to the Nonprofit Act with the Ontario Nonprofit Network. There is a new school for social entrepreneurs in Toronto that will be expanding throughout Ontario. Please visit their website if you have an individual within your organization or a client that's a social entrepreneur that may benefit. The Ontario Nonprofit Network is doing work on the Nonprofit Act around social enterprise, but is also hosting our Rural Social Enterprise Constellation Project. And if you'd like to know more about the Social Enterprise Constellation Project, feel free to contact me. At the national level, watch for the resources with enterprising nonprofits. It's no longer only in BC, but it's coming across Canada, and there are a number of ENP regional collaboratives in Alberta and now in Ontario. The Social Enterprise Council of Canada and the Women's Economic Council, as well as SEDNet, have done some work on national social enterprise policy, and the BC Centre for Social Enterprise has done an awful lot of research into business structures and the CRA. In the U.S., We've talked about the REDF, and I've referred you to an excellent resource from REDF, but their site is chock full of information on and supports for social enterprise. The Social Enterprise Alliance I'll speak about in a minute around their listserv, and if you want to check out anything going on in the UK, you can visit Social Enterprise UK and the UK School for Social Entrepreneurs. Here's a finally, before we finish, let's review some of the risks, challenges, and opportunities that social enterprise presents. This slide shows a cooperative social enterprise that was nurtured by St. Joseph's Immigrant Women's Center in Hamilton a few years ago. Through the enterprise, women from diverse backgrounds were trained and dispatched to do community-based research for the health sector and other institutional sectors. Here's a review of some of the risks and challenges we've talked about through this webinar series. I'm sure many of you will recognize these if you've already started down the social enterprise development path. We've mentioned again and again mission drift as a risk and some strategies to address this. We also commented that one risk is that we create inadequate jobs or job development for our participants that does not link them adequately to the marketplace. Competition in community is a significant risk, particularly in smaller communities in rural regions. When your investment doesn't lead to sufficient returns, this is a significant risk, and all the more reason to do really good feasibility analysis. Sometimes we work on poor assumptions and we're overly optimistic because we're enthused about social enterprise. Again, this is a huge risk when you're investing significant resources. And sometimes our economic and political climate where we cannot control outcomes is a major risk, and we have to look at that in a SWOT analysis when we're doing business planning and feasibility planning and assessment. The challenges are time. We know it takes time to do social enterprise, and the costs of startup, particularly when there's only a patchwork of funds available. The lack of business supports and expertise is a challenge for nonprofits that may not have those readily at their fingertips. Integrating social enterprise into your social service culture we've talked about today as a challenge for some, not for all. Funder understanding of social enterprise may be something you face as a challenge. Some funders know more about it than others, and quite often we have to educate them. Connections to the industry are a challenge for nonprofits, but there are strategies we've shared through the webinar series as to how to link to the industry. And overburdened staff roles are a critical challenge for nonprofits. Social enterprise is not something you can do off the corner of your desk. Here are some of the success factors we reviewed in the first webinar. Of course, the most successful social enterprises have a really tight fit with their mission and agency objectives. They use timing well, even if they can't move quickly on a social enterprise planning process. They know how to time the process. There's a real market opportunity for successful social enterprises. They're not out there creating something that doesn't exist. There are people willing to buy the product or service. Successful social enterprises integrate their social enterprise planning and operations into their strategic plan, and they have a strong leadership and entrepreneurial team. They have capacity and expertise in business development and linkages to the sector. They know how to calculate risks and take those risks, and they have access to different forms of capital. Successful agencies doing social enterprise have an ability to develop partnerships where it's necessary to make the social enterprise fly. Those that do social enterprise successfully have very supportive board members, and they have an entrepreneurial and market focus. Before we review our final slides, let's do our last poll. At this time, how would you rate your organization's capacity to engage in social enterprise? While you're filling out that form, I'll talk about the featured resources. The Social Enterprise Alliance in the U.S. has a social enterprise, what they call tool belt. So in addition to enterprising nonprofits, you can also look at this tool belt to see if there are resources that apply to our Canadian context. And again, we've talked about the multiple resources on the Enterprising Nonprofit site. There is also an additional resource through the Enterprise Alliance, which is a listserv that you can post any questions free of charge to a number of people who are on the listserv throughout Canada, the US, the UK, and even other parts of the world. Here's a few key messages from this webinar to leave you with. Plan decision points at each stage of your enterprise planning with go, no-go kinds of milestones. Get your champions and supports on side. Build your team and an enterprising culture within your organization. Use your business plan as a roadmap and a tool for engagement and capacity building. Recognize that funding will be a patchwork process. And social enterprise success is an equation. It equals vision and mission focus plus your passion, the fire in your belly, plus good planning, plus a whole lot of luck. Let's look at the results of poll 8 and compare with the poll from the last session. So let's see, for this time, 29% of you have indicated that your capacity is still pretty low at the poor level. 14% have a fair capacity, and about 30% have a good and 14% very good. Some of you are still thinking about it. So we have, an equal number that have a good and poor, and we do have an equal number that are fair and very good. So there's a real mix on the webinar series. For those of you who are fair or poor, hopefully you've got some tips on how to bring up your capacity to a level where you think you may be able to engage social enterprise planning more effectively. And for those who have a very good or very good capacity, I also hope some of these resources will take you a bit further. Let's see, last time, if you could leave that poll up, last time we asked and 43% said that you had fair compared to 14% fair, and 36% had good, whereas 29% had very good in this poll, and 14% had very good in this poll, and 21% had very good prior. So it means that the folks on this particular webinar have a little less capacity perhaps, or you're thinking twice about it and assessing it based on many of the factors that we've talked about in the last couple of webinars, which is a good thing. Last time I asked the participants of the webinar, do you expect to use any of the following in further exploring social enterprises? We do hope that these tools and resources will be of use to you. As I've been planning these webinars, I've been delightfully surprised at the number of resources we have available to learn about social enterprise and the tools that are available to you. I do hope that you'll be able to explore some of them. So your homework today is to check out those resources, tools, and the links provided, and join us on the final Community of Practice question and answer, which will be on Thursday, October 11th, from 10:30 to 11:30. Bring your questions and comments on social enterprise that day. Send them in advance if you want to Petra Roberts at Okazi at proberts@okazi.org. I'll repeat that, proberts@okazi.org. Or you can sign in to the community practice prior to October 11th and place your questions up there for me to answer. I'll ask if there's any questions now at the end of the webinar. No one has posted any to date, but then I've been talking quite a bit. So if there are any questions you'd like to see answered either now or in the community practice, please feel free to jot them down in the chat area right now before we leave. Any questions? We'll wait a few minutes. I don't see anyone writing away there. Nope. Okay. So again, what I'll do is just encourage you to use the community of practice as a time when you can receive a bit of coaching on social enterprise. And I'll repeat that we will be doing a bridging project between now and the spring when we repeat these webinars on both sustainability planning and social enterprise, as well as collaboration. The bridging will involve a poll or a survey, an online survey, to take some of what we learned in the polls in the webinars a step further with our whole community and see where you'd like to go next. And again, I just encourage you to stay with your process, keep your ideas, focus on your vision, and I look forward to supporting you in your further work as we go on. Thanks so much for your participation. Please do remember to provide your feedback on this session immediately after the webinar. Goodbye, everyone.